Right now, somewhere in the Kalahari Desert, a child is falling asleep under a sky so dark it looks solid. No walls, no door, no lock, just a small fire burning down to embers, a mother's arm across her chest, and the sound of something large moving through the brush 30 meters away. The child sleeps anyway. For 2.5 million years, this was childhood. Every human who ever lived spent their first years in exactly this kind of night. No fortified walls, no electric light, no 9/11 to call. Just firelight, bodies, and whatever ancient system evolution had built to keep small humans alive long enough to become large ones. And somehow, almost all of them made it. The question nobody really asks, the one that should keep you up at night, is how. We assume protection means hardware, locks, walls, alarm systems. We've built an entire civilization on the idea that safety is something you construct, something external, something you can buy. But for 99% of human history, none of that existed. The children who survived weren't protected by architecture. They were protected by something far older, far stranger, and far more sophisticated than anything we've built since. A system so layered, physical, behavioral, social, psychological, that modern researchers are still finding new pieces of it. And here's the part that should disturb you a little. Some of those pieces start with fire, because everyone starts with fire. It's the obvious answer, the easy answer, and like most easy answers, it's only about a third of the story. Homo erectus was controlling fire at least 1 million years ago. The evidence from Wonderwork Cave in South Africa puts it at 1.07 million years. Burnt bone, charred plant ash, the unmistakable signature of intentional combustion. That's not lightning strike opportunism. That's a species that had learned to keep something alive on purpose. Fire did 3 things for children specifically. It pushed predators back. Most large African predators, lions, leopards, hyenas, have a hardwired aversion to fire. A burning perimeter wasn't perfect, but it was powerful. Studies of modern lion behavior show they will travel hundreds of meters out of their way to avoid an active fire, even a small one. It concentrated warmth. Infants can't thermoregulate the way adults can. They lose heat fast. A fire-centered camp meant the difference between a child burning calories staying warm versus burning calories growing. And fire created light. Just enough. The kind of dim, flickering light that doesn't trigger full alertness in the adult brain but does make the surrounding darkness visible. A parent could see 20 meters out. That changed what a sleeping child represented. A liability or just a child. But here's what nobody tells you about fire and ancient children. Fire was also the thing that could kill them. Burn injuries are almost invisible in the archaeological record. Burnt bones look like burnt bones regardless of cause, but anthropologists who study living hunter-gatherer groups have documented something striking. Burns are among the most common injuries in camp-dwelling children. Not predator attacks, burns. Because fire in an open camp is everywhere. It's not behind a grate, it's in the middle of the space where children crawl and play and fall. And very young children have almost no capacity to understand what fire means until they've touched it. Anthropologist Frank Marlowe spent years studying the Hadza of northern Tanzania and documented injury patterns across age groups. Burns appeared consistently, especially among the youngest. Fire was protection. Fire was also hazard. Both things at once with no way to resolve the contradiction. This is the first thing ancient parents had to understand. The thing keeping your child alive could also hurt them. Managing that tension was the very beginning of protection. So fire gets you through the night, but fire doesn't follow you. During the day, the camp dispersed. Adults went to gather, to hunt, to collect water. What happened to the children during these hours is one of the more fascinating puzzles in evolutionary biology. The answer was not, as we might assume, that mothers simply carried their infants everywhere. Some did. Among the Kung San of the Kalahari, ethnographer Melvin Connor documented infant-carrying behavior through the 1970s. He found that Kung mothers carried their infants in a sling for most of the first year, keeping them in near constant physical contact. The average Kung infant was in contact with another human body for roughly 70 to 80% of daylight hours. That number should stop you, not because it seems high, because compared to what we do now, it is extraordinarily high, and compared to what we evolved expecting, it might be exactly right. But Connor also documented something that changes the entire picture. Children weren't only with their mothers. The Aka pygmies of Central Africa have a practice so unusual it's been studied by researchers from a dozen universities. In Aka camps, fathers hold their infants more than fathers in any other documented culture on Earth. Anthropologist Barry Hewlett spent years living with the Aka in the 1980s and found that Aka fathers were within arm's reach of their infants for roughly 47% of daylight hours, not passively nearby, actually holding them. That's not just culturally interesting. That's a data point about what ancient protective behavior looked like. Because the Aka weren't unusual in one respect, they were highly typical of a pattern researchers see again and again in small-scale societies. Childcare was never a mother's job. It was a group's job. Grandmothers were possibly the most important caregivers after mothers. Anthropologist Kristen Hawkes at the University of Utah spent years with the Hadza and came back with one of the most influential ideas in evolutionary biology, the grandmother hypothesis. Humans live far longer after their reproductive years than any other primate. That extension isn't an accident. It exists because post-reproductive women, grandmothers, dramatically increase the survival odds of their grandchildren. Hadza grandmothers work harder than anyone else in camp. They forage longer hours, carry more food, and funnel almost all of it toward their grandchildren and daughters. When a grandmother is present, child growth rates go up. When she isn't, they go down. She is not a bonus, she is infrastructure. But here's the part of the protection story that gets almost no attention. The ancient darkness wasn't just outside. It was everywhere as soon as the sun went down. And darkness for a small child is not just the absence of light, it's the presence of imagination, of sound without source, of movement you can't track. The psychological experience of darkness in early childhood is genuinely terrifying in ways adults have mostly forgotten. A 4-year-old Hadza child waking at 2 a.m. to a sound in the brush is not having a different experience than your 4-year-old waking at 2 a.m. to a sound in the house. The fear is identical. The neurobiology is identical. Evolution gave children the same startle response, the same cortisol spike, the same desperate need for a body to press against, regardless of whether the danger is real or imagined. And this is where the ancient solution becomes almost unbearably simple. They didn't protect children from the dark by eliminating it. They protected them by never leaving them in it alone. Researcher James McKenna at the University of Notre Dame spent 30 years studying mother-infant co-sleeping. What he found in his lab was not a parenting preference. It was a biological system. When a mother and infant sleep together, their breathing synchronizes, their sleep cycles synchronize. The mother's body monitors the infant's carbon dioxide levels through unconscious breath sensing and adjusts her own breathing in response. This is not metaphor. This is physiology. The mother is part of the infant's life support system during sleep. McKenna coined the term breast sleeping for this integrated system of shared sleep, nighttime feeding, and physical contact. He argues that this is not one option among many. It is what the infant's biology expects, what it was built for. What 2.5 million years of evolution designed it to receive. In the ancient camp, this wasn't a philosophy, it was just what you did. Everyone slept together. Children between adults, surrounded by warm bodies. The darkness outside the fire ring held things that could kill you. The only response that made sense was to make the space inside that ring as dense with human bodies as possible. You didn't manage the darkness, you outdensed it. In 2017, researcher David Sampson at the University of Toronto published a study on sleep timing in 3 traditional societies, the Hadza, the San, and the Seamen of Bolivia. He was trying to answer a simple question: did ancient humans sleep the way we do? 8 hours, nighttime only, uninterrupted? The answer was no. Traditional societies sleep in shorter bouts. They go to sleep later than we assume. They wake during the night, sometimes for an hour or more, then sleep again. This isn't insomnia. This is the baseline human sleep pattern. The one we had before artificial light convinced us that waking at midnight meant something was wrong. But what Sampson noticed was the protective logic embedded in this fragmented pattern. In any group sleeping together, not everyone is in the same sleep phase at the same time. At virtually any moment of the night, at least one adult is in light sleep or briefly awake, not standing watch. Not assigned to do anything, just cycling through their natural sleep phases while everyone else cycles through theirs. The group as a unit was never fully unconscious. This was not a plan. It was an emergent property of how humans sleep. Natural, staggered sleep cycles created passive, unintentional, continuous surveillance of the camp. A child waking in distress at 3 a.m. would almost certainly rouse an adult already close to the surface of sleep, already primed to respond. The ancient protection system didn't require heroes staying up all night. It required everyone to sleep exactly the way they were already going to sleep. The real reason they survived has nothing to do with what you just learned. Or rather, it has everything to do with it, but there's a deeper layer underneath all of it, one that changes what protection actually means. The human child is born more helpless than almost any other mammal on Earth. A foal can walk in hours. A wildebeest calf can run within minutes of birth. It has to, or it dies. A human infant cannot hold up its own head for months, cannot walk for over a year. cannot survive without continuous care for years after that. This is not a design flaw. It is a radical evolutionary gamble. The human brain grows more after birth than any other primates. It nearly triples in size in the first year of life. To allow that growth, the skull has to be born before the brain is finished. The child that arrives in the world is unfinished by design. Unfinished so it can finish in the world, shaped by everything it encounters. But that gamble required something in return. It required the group to function as an external womb for years. Every social behavior we've discussed, the co-sleeping, the grandmothering, the constant carrying, it all exists because the child's brain needed protected developmental time. Chronic fear in early childhood rewires the developing brain in ways that cannot be fully undone. Chronic cortisol, hypervigilance, difficulty trusting. Ancient humans weren't just protecting their children's bodies from the dark, they were protecting the architecture of the adults those children would become. Anthropologist Sarah Hrdy at the University of California, Davis spent decades developing cooperative breeding theory. Her argument is that humans are unique among great apes in one specific way. We allow non-mothers to care for infants. Chimpanzee mothers almost never hand their infants to other individuals. Humans do the opposite. We hand babies around. Grandmothers, fathers, older children, neighbors. Hrdy argues this is not incidental. This is what made us human. Because when you give your infant to another person, you are making an assessment. You are reading that person's intentions, predicting their reliability, trusting your read. The infants passed around the most were exposed to the most varied faces, the most complex emotional signals. They were receiving training in reading people from their first weeks of life. And the mothers who handed their children around were the mothers who had built the most reliable social networks. Safety was not something you built with wood and stone. Safety was something you built with trust, over years through 10,000 small acts of reciprocity. You fed someone when they were hungry. You held their child when they needed their hands free. You shared your fire on a cold night without being asked. And in return, the group held your child in the dark. There is a boy in ethnographic records from the 1950s, a Netsilik Inuit child whose case was described by anthropologist Asen Balik C. The Arctic winter meant darkness for 20 hours a day, for months. Not the gradual darkening of dusk, but simply the absence of the sun for an entire season. This child slept in a semi-subterranean dwelling made of sod and bone. Pressed between his parents, his grandmother at his feet. The oil lamp burned low through the night, casting just enough light to make the walls visible. Outside, at -40 FF, the ice moved and groaned. Polar bears walked within 100 meters of where he slept. He was not afraid. Not because he was brave, not because he had been trained to suppress fear, but because everything his nervous system knew told him he was exactly as safe as he was supposed to be. He was surrounded by bodies. He could hear breathing. He was warm. The lamp was lit. His brain, ancient, perfectly calibrated, read all of that correctly. He was safe. We have traded most of that system away. Not maliciously. We traded it for things that are genuinely valuable. Privacy, independence, the specific kind of security that comes from a locked door between your child and the world. But the child's brain does not know about locked doors. It is running software 2.5 million years old. It knows about bodies and warmth and the sound of breathing and firelight at the edge of vision. It knows what safety feels like in its cells. And it notices with great precision when those signals are absent. The ancient humans had no theory of child development, no attachment research, no sleep science. They had something older and maybe more reliable, a system that worked passed down not in words but in behavior, in reflex, in the simple fact that the children who were held survived, and the children left alone in the dark did not. We know more about neuroscience and development than any generation in human history. We are also the first to routinely put our children to sleep in separate rooms, alone, in the dark, and call it healthy independence. Both of those things are true at the same time. Somewhere tonight, a child is pressing against a parent in the dark, feeling in their ancient nervous system the wordless certainty that they will survive the night. Not because the locks are good, because the body beside them is warm. That is not sentiment. That is 2.5 million years of evidence.